Right. Welcome everyone to our Desert Refuge training. We're very excited that you're all joining us today. This is the kickoff training of a new project. It's a collaboration between Desert Botanical Garden and the USA National Phenology Network. My name is Erin Postumus. I'm the outreach coordinator for the NPN, and I am joined today by Dr. Kim Pegram and Natalie Melkonoff, and they're both going to be sharing some information with you all today. So we are recording this and we'll be sending out the link as an email following the training. We'll also have it on the Desert Refuge landing page if you ever need to refer back to it. And we also are happy to take questions. We'll probably save them for the end of the training. So if you think of things you have questions about, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll make sure to save time for that. And then also, if you want to let us know right now in the chat, just where you're calling in from, we just like to see kind of where everyone's spread out across the state. So feel free to put a note in the chat. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim, I think, first.
Okay, welcome everybody. It's so great to see, and I see a lot of faces that I recognize, or names that I recognize too. So it's great to see all of this participation. We're so excited for this project. These are questions that we've had for a long time and are really have looked at other ways to pursue them. And this seems like the best option is to get data from everybody in the state. So, or a lot of people in the state. So we're really excited. Erin, if you want to go to the next slide. So I think most of you are probably familiar with monarchs as a butterfly that we all that we recognize. That, you know, if anybody knows a butterfly, they probably know a monarch. They occur over, you know, most of the United States. So a lot of people grew up seeing them. And we know they have this close relationship with milkweed plants. Those are specific plants that they need for their caterpillars. It's the only thing their caterpillars can eat. And we'll talk a little bit more about that relationship. But in terms of, you know, the other important thing about monarchs is that they migrate. They to deal with decreasing temperatures and the lack of plants and resources, they migrate to different areas for the winter. And so when we look at a map of the US, there's primarily two flyways, or sometimes referred to as populations for monarchs in the US. There's the eastern, and this is a much bigger flyway, many more, you know, millions of monarchs that spend the summer in the kind of Midwest, Southern Canada area, you know, in the spring, in the mid-Atlantic and the eastern part of the country. And then they migrate in the fall to spend the winter in Mexico, in central Mexico. So this is the big overwintering sites that you hear a lot about. You see the big, you know, pictures with them hanging from the trees and everything. And then there's a smaller population or flyway in the West. And so that's the ones that are mostly in California, Oregon, other areas during the summer, and then go to spend the winter along the coast of California. And these are a little more spread out. There's a lot of different sites along the coast of California that you can visit, some bigger than others, but is a smaller population. So that might leave you to kind of look at this area that we're in Arizona.
Kim, you're muted.
Thanks. Thank you. When I tried to flip the screen, I accidentally muted myself. So that might lead you to think, well, what's going on in Arizona? We've got these two flyways. We're kind of in the middle of them. So what's happening? Well, thanks to some great research by Southwest Monarch Study, they tag butterflies, which is they put a sticker on the wing of a monarch that doesn't affect its ability to fly. And the tag goes, so they record where the butterfly started, where it was tagged, and then where it ended up. They try to recover butterflies that have been tagged. And so that's what these arrows on this map are places where they started and where they end up. And from this research, they've kind of very clearly showed that in Arizona, we have monarchs that go to both Mexico and California as part of the migration, as part of the overwintering. And this is what's happening in the fall, kind of right now. But there's also another kind of unique thing going on here is that, Erin, if you want to flip, we also see butterflies that spend the winter here, that they seem to be present kind of throughout our winter. From the fall, roughly September time, through the winter and into the spring a little bit. In the low desert parts of Arizona, we don't generally see them in the summer. But so they spend the winter here. But when we look at the overwintering sites, these kind of main overwintering sites in Mexico and California, the monarchs are not very active. They're forming these big clusters, they're hanging in the trees, they're not really doing much, and they're not breeding. They're not, mating, they're not finding a pair and then the females laying eggs and have caterpillars and all of those things. Those aren't usually happening in the main overwintering sites. The other thing that's different about those overwintering sites is there's usually not milkweed that they can use that's, has leaves on it and things like that at the time. But in this, these overwintering monarchs in Arizona, we see that for some part of the winter, some portion of the winter, they are breeding. We are seeing caterpillars, but we also know that we have milkweed available. So there's kind of big questions about, okay, what's going on here? Are we an overwintering site? Are they staying here because we have milkweed? When actually are they breeding and what triggers that? We think it's sometime in February, but we don't have a lot of actual data to back that up. We've got anecdotal observations and maybe you guys have all seen them too. So now we kind of want to get at some of these questions kind of from a scientific perspective to figure out the timing. So when are monarchs found in different parts of the state? And when are they breeding during this overwintering time? And we see some breeding in fall too. You probably, we talked about, you see some caterpillars on your plants right now. What milkweeds are monarchs using? Because here in Arizona, we've got something like 30 different species of milkweeds in the state. Now, most of those are not available, commercially. So when we're talking about urban gardens, backyard gardens, it's narrowed down to a few species. But what milkweeds are they using? And then we want to know, what are milkweeds doing during the winter? Are they losing their leaves? Do the leaves stay? What kind of resources are available there on the plants for monarchs? So essentially, this study that we're presenting here and asking you to participate in is going to help us answer these questions by tracking when monarchs are present and absent in many locations throughout the state. So that's one of these things that separates this study from other ones. In the past, we've asked you to tag monarchs in iNaturalist, which is an awesome thing to do. But what iNaturalist and other platforms don't give us is the absence data. To actually get the timing down, we need to know when they're there and when they're not. And that's one of the awesome things about this project and working with the National Phenology Network here. Same thing with caterpillars, when they're present, but also when they're absent. And then the phenology, the timing of the milkweeds and their different phases. So you might be familiar, but we're going to kind of do a quick refresher that in Arizona, we have two butterflies that look very, very similar. And that's because they're closely related. They're both in the same genus. We've got queens and monarchs, and queens are generally here year round. And queens also feed on milkweed. Easy ways to distinguish them. The queens are a little bit smaller and a little more kind of a brownish orange color. If you get a good look at them as in the adult form, one thing to look for is I can't really use the pointer, but the first kind of red arrow there, if you look at the forewing, the top wing on a queen, you'll see the veins aren't filled in with kind of a black line. Whereas on the forewing of the monarch, we do see these veins that are, have the black lines on them. There's other things people use, you're looking for extra white spots, whatever. You can look at these two pictures and whatever jumps out to you as like, oh, okay, that looks different, I see the difference, can be helpful. And then once you get the hang of it, you'll get it real quick, real easy. Now the caterpillars are even easier, I think. You've got, they've got a different pattern, but they still are, black, white, and yellow. But they have these, both of these caterpillars have these little things called tubercles. They're these fleshy little filaments that come off the caterpillar. And a queen has 3 pairs. It has a pair on the front, a pair in the middle, and a pair on the back. Now that's different from a monarch that has just a pair on the front and a pair on the back. So all you have to do is count those tubercles there, and you'll see 6 total on the queen and 4 total on the monarch. Now, looking at other stages, eggs, because both the queen and the monarch lay their eggs on milkweed. So the eggs, we can't really tell the difference between. And same thing when they first hatch out of the egg, like very little, they're super tiny, size of an eyelash, so tiny. Usually that very first instar, that's the first stage of the caterpillar, we can't tell the difference between the two, but that's okay. That difference becomes obvious within like a day or 2 of them hatching out. So we aren't really focusing on egg data here. You can provide it if you want, but because it's kind of ambiguous about which species it is, it won't be as important if that's a question you've got. And Erin, I don't know if you'll address later. I know I've gotten asked this question about tracking queens. It's not the purpose of this study, but I think it's possible that you could always add them as an animal that's at your site. But it's not the purpose of the study, so don't feel like you need to track the queens.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the next slide is Natalie. Is that the plan?
Yes. Hi. All right. Hey, everyone. So I'm just going to run through some profiles of the milkweeds that we think you might have in your yard. So these are the ones that we're including in the study because they're available on National Phenology Network platform, and they're ones that you are likely going to have in your urban spaces. So I'm just going to run through a few details about them and things you want to pay attention to when you're collecting data on these plants. So this is Arizona milkweed, or Asclepias angustifolia. I think maybe quite a few of you have this in your yard if you're in the Phoenix area or in Tucson. Stays a little smaller, has these beautiful white flowers, and it will bloom year-round if you're watering it in your gardens. And you can sort of see on each of these species profiles, you're going to see their ranges a little bit. So we're really just at the very northern edge of the range here in the southeastern part of the state, and then this extends down into Mexico beyond what you're seeing on the map. This isn't a species that we find out in wildlands in central Arizona, but it does really well here in our urban spaces. So that's why we're growing it. And the next one. Okay, desert milkweed or rush milkweed. Both of these names are listed on the National Phenology Network. So whichever name you prefer to use, at Desert Botanical Garden, we use desert milkweed. So that's what I'm going to say throughout the presentation. This one is Asclepias subulata. This is probably the one that you've seen most often or frequently if you're in the central or southern parts of the state. It's become really popular in landscaping and medians. It has really thin succulent stems, gets about 3 to 4 feet tall by 3 to 4 feet wide. Again, one that is going to bloom year round in urban settings. And this one can take really, really hot, dry areas. So as opposed to the Arizona milkweed that we just saw that, prefers a little bit of filtered light or partial shade if you have it, this one does really well in those hot spots. And then again, you can see our range reaching all the way down into Mexico. Go to the next one. Okay, this is giant sand milkweed, also known as desert milkweed. So just pay attention to the names of the plants when you are choosing them for the study, and Erin will talk about that a little bit more later. But this is another one. Maybe you're not as likely to have this one in your yard, but we are growing it here at Desert Botanical Garden. So it's slowly making its way out into the urban systems, I think. The range of this one stretches west of us in the Mojave and Sonoran deserts. This one will get pretty tall, but will die back in the winter. So this one and a few species we're going to see after this, they have a pretty active spring, summer growing season, and then they're going to die back in the fall. This one again can take full sun in those really hot spots in your yard. Go to the next one. Okay, this is Antelope horns milkweed. One that we can cultivate in our urban spaces in the central part of the state. Might do a little bit better up north or down south. This one has mixed availability. So again, maybe not one that you have, but you might be able to see in certain parts of the state. So this one also stays small, about 1 to 2 feet. It can do full sun, but it can also do partial shade. This is a really interesting species. If you look at the range map, you'll see that it's spread pretty much throughout the whole state. So this one has quite a few habitat types that it grows in. It'll grow in grasslands. It'll also grow in kind of a light forest understory. So this one you'll find in quite a few sites. So if you're looking to add it to your yard, kind of keep that in mind. This is another one that dies back in the winter. So again, just like the one we just saw, has a really active spring, summer growing season, and then is not going to be active over the winter months. Go to the next one. Okay. Horsetail milkweed, or Asclepias subverticillata. You can see from the map here that this one is also spread throughout the state. So not as much in the Phoenix Valley and the western part of the state, but certainly up north and the southeastern part of the state. This one grows, if you live in one of those areas, maybe you've seen it, it'll grow pretty freely along roadsides. If you take a trip up to Flagstaff, it's all along the 17 there. So another one that is active in the spring and the summer and early fall, and then is going to die back in the winter. This one, again, can take full sun or partial shade. So this species and the previous two that we talked about, the giant sand milkweed and antelope horns milkweed, all have similar growth forms. They're going to have a really active growing season. Then they're going to die back. You might not see the plants at all over the winter season. And they're also spreading rhizomatously. So they're growing underground stems and spreading that way, whereas the rest of these milkweeds are not doing that. Okay, I think we have one more on here. All right, pine needle milkweed, or Asclepias lanaria, another one that is pretty available in the trade now. So you might have this one in your home garden. You can see its native range there, a little bit east of Phoenix, and then stretching down into the southern part of the state and into northern Mexico. This one, it gets its name because if you look at those really thin leaves, they look like pine needles, so pine needle milkweed. This one stays, it's a kind of a mid-sized milkweed, I guess, about 2 by 4 feet, 2 feet wide by 4 feet tall. This one can do full sun or partial shade. And again, it's going to be one that's blooming year round if you're watering it in your gardens. So go to the next slide. Okay, so Erin and National Phenology Network have put together these really, really helpful phenophase photo guides. So when you're collecting data on your milkweed, you're going to be looking for these different types of life stages. When does the plant have leaves? When does it have flowers or flower buds? When does it have fruit? When does it have ripe fruit? And so these different terms might get a little bit confusing. That's why we have these really great guides for you. So these will all be available for you. And if you have a question about what one of these stages looks like, it's really easy to check the guide and make sure you're recording the right information. On the left here, you can see these are all the potential stages. You'll notice if you see the guide that's up on the screen, it's the pine needle milkweed guide. It has young leaves on there, but doesn't have initial growth. So young leaves are just young unfolded leaves that are just starting to grow on the plant. Something like initial growth, we're going to see on those plants that are dying back in the winter. So those three that we talked about, the giant sand milkweed, the antelope horns milkweed, and the horsetail milkweed. Those plants that are dying back completely in the winter and then emerging from the ground again, they're going to have something like initial growth. So you'll see that the phases are going to vary a little bit from milkweed to milkweed, but we have some pretty basic stages that you'll see for all the plants. And again, if you have questions about that, you're welcome to reach out to us, and then also check these phenophages photo guides. They're going to be really, really helpful. I think that's all I have.
Trying to unmute myself. Did you want to talk about this one, Kim, or do you want me to?
Yeah. So we have been very fortunate to get funding from Monarch joint venture and the US Forest Service, or their international programs, to fund kind of getting this project started. So we did a little bit of like pilot data collection this past winter, I guess, winter, spring. We had a few people participate. If you're one of those people, awesome. Thank you so much. That helped us kind of figure out exactly like what we wanted to do with the protocol, what data we wanted to collect, and how long we wanted to collect it for. And then now going into kind of the second winter of the project, we are doing kind of this statewide data collection. So you might hear kind of differences. I just want to like clarify between, for you can collect data year round on this for sure. But, I see we've got people from Northern Arizona and kind of Central and Southern Arizona on here. So Central and Southern Arizona, we mostly see monarchs kind of the September through, through May period. And that's like kind of our focus, but you can always collect out of that range. If you're in higher elevations, again, you can collect anytime. But you're probably not going to be seeing monarchs in the winter, but it's also great information to have about what the milkweeds are doing at that time. So timeline wise, we've got kind of the minimum period and the maximum period, so that we can capture like the most important time points to get the timing of the monarchs. So we'll kind of ask for collection at least through, for Central and Southern Arizona, through May if you can. But again, you can continue to collect longer. But this summer we'll be focused on, after we kind of wrapped out, we'll be focused on the key times for Central and Southern. We'll be working on data analysis and trying to, look at the timing. And we know that timing can vary from year to year too. So we're looking at 1 year, we're looking at kind of this snapshot, but there are, and we will share the results with you. We might share little results throughout the season, but we'll also share results towards the end of the study as well. But then hopefully, we might be seeking out other funding sources, or, if we're able to continue it, the platform will still be there. So you can continue to collect data, past the fall or whatever, just kind of throwing it out there. So you're not like, okay, this is a one and done. You can participate more if you want to. That is totally up to you. But that's our basic timeline.
Awesome, thank you. All right. So now we're going to get into some of the more details about how you can participate in this effort. So the first step is really to find a milkweed plant. What you're going to be doing is you're finding a milkweed that is something that's easily accessible for you, so you can go back to it weekly, ideally. If you can't go weekly, that's okay. That's kind of the time frame that we're hoping for. If you want to go more frequently than that, that's wonderful as well. But something that's easy for you to access, that maybe it's something that you walk by every day. It could be something that's in your yard if you have a milkweed plant, or in a nearby park, someplace that is convenient for you. And you're going to be going back to the same plant and making repeated observations over time. So you can track a single plant if that is what you have. Or if you have an area where there's multiple plants, you can actually track that as a patch or kind of a group of plants that you assess and then report as if it were one big organism. So once you find a milkweed that you want to observe, the steps are basically to set up an account in Nature's Notebook, which is the NPN's Plant and Animal Observation platform. You register a site, which is the location at which you're going to track your milkweed. You add your milkweed as well as monarchs as a species to your site, and then you'll make those weekly observations. So I'll go through each of those in some more detail. So if you haven't used Nature's Notebook before, you can actually do everything on our apps. So you can find the Nature's Notebook app in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, wherever you get your apps. And once you download it, you will have a prompt to create an account. And basically all you need is to set up your username or email and then a password. You might see that there's a place on the registration page where you're asked about partner group, but don't worry about that. You don't have to fill out anything there. You can just go forward as an individual observer. So once you have the app, then you can create a site. And so you'll be walked through on the app the process of either putting in your address, or you can zoom in on the map and kind of drop a pin. It's a Google Map interface, and select the location of your plant. And basically your site is just going to be the area around your milkweed plant or patch of plants. So you don't have to worry about, how big is my site or anything like that. For the purpose of this project, it's just the area that kind of encompasses your milkweed plant. Then once you have your site set up, you can add different plants and animals to it. And remember that for the milkweeds, you're actually going to be adding this at the level of the either individual plant or patch. So you're actually, you're going in, you're searching for your milkweed species that you have. And this is where, if you have the desert or rush milkweed, if you just search for desert milkweed, you should see both options come up, and then you'll see the pictures of each one. So you can make sure you select the right one. And you'll add the plant to your site, and then you can give it a nickname. So if it's helpful, you can call it, it'll be default to whatever the common name is -1. But if you want to call it, front yard milkweed or something to help you remember the location, you can do that as well. And then for monarchs, you'll actually add it at the species level, because we don't know if you're going to see the same individual monarch butterflies. We just have you add the species, and then you're looking for any individuals of that species when you're doing your data collection. For this project, we would like a few more pieces of information if possible. So this is something that you can't do on the app right now. It's something that we want to add, but if you log in with your same account information on the website, you can give us some more information. You don't have to do this, but it's a nice thing to add a little bit more information. So when you look at your observation deck, which is when you're logged in on Nature's Notebook, you'll see that there's a place at the bottom where you can edit your site that you've created. And then there you can add in some more details. And this can really give us a lot more information about what your site looks like. Is it urban? Is it near pavement, like a road? And just some more detail. You can also add more information about your milkweed plant that you added. And this is where, if you are observing as a patch, you will need to go in and check this box here for patch. And then once you check that box, it'll ask you about how big is your patch in either square feet or square meters or something like that. And you can also give us some more information about whether there's shade on your plant, whether it's a wild plant versus something that you planted. You could even put in the planting date if you know that. So if you're going to be buying a milkweed plant for this project, which you could do if you want, then you can actually put that information in so we know that it was a more recently planted individual. And then you can also tell us whether it's watered. This can make a big difference for the phenology, so we always encourage that information. And then you can add whether it's fertilized as well. If you want to add more comments too, you can, if you want to tell us anything about your plant that we didn't already ask about. If your plant does die at some point, you can also remove it by selecting one of these options here. Either delete it if you don't want to observe it anymore, or you can tell us that it died and why it died if you'd like to. If you're already a Nature's Notebook observer, and I know a couple of you are, then you can either set up a new site if you want for this project, or you can just add a milkweed and monarchs to an existing site. Or maybe you already have milkweeds and monarchs that you're monitoring as part of one of your sites. And then in that case, you could just do your weekly observations and you'll be contributing to this project. Should be great. All right, so let's kind of walk through what it would be like to make some observations. So let's say this is your milkweed. This I would probably set up as a patch because it's a little hard to tell apart these individual plants. I could either pick this one over here as one plant, or maybe I would just say, I'm going to monitor all of these brush or desert milkweeds here. And then when I enter my data, I'm going to be considering that whole patch of plants as what I'm looking at. So when you're answering questions, this is what a data sheet looks like in Nature's Notebook for most of our milkweed species. So we have questions about the leaves, and we have questions about the flowers, and then questions about the fruits. For this project, we're really interested in the questions about the leaves and the flowers. And you're welcome to add the information about the fruits as well. Those are pretty visible and easy to observe, so we welcome you to do that as well. But we're really focused in on these leaves and flowers questions. We want to know if the leaves are available for monarchs to lay their eggs and then have the caterpillars, and the caterpillars can eat the leaves. And then we also want to know about whether the plants are flowering, which is a great nectar source for the monarchs as well. So for each of these questions, it's basically a yes or no question. And then you also have the option to put a question mark. So if you're not sure about which one it is, you can either leave the question blank, or you can actually select the question mark, which means I'm not sure. And this actually allows you to, if you want, you can go back later if you realize, oh, now I understand what an open flower looks like. I'm going to go back and say, yes, I actually did see open flowers last week. And so you can edit your observations if you need to. I also want to emphasize what Natalie was talking about is we do have these very descriptive, we call these phenophase definitions. These are the life cycle definitions for each of the questions on the data sheet. So we want to provide you all of the information that you need for this project. We don't want you to try to guess at what it means by initial growth or what's the difference between a flower bud versus an open flower. We're giving you very specific definitions about what those things are. And for some of them, even with the fruit definitions we give you for this species, you'll know that it's a bright fruit because it'll look like this. So we have a lot of description here. And also there's these, you'll notice these other questions like these, how many flowers or flower buds? We call these the intensity questions. These are optional as well. If you want to go all the way through and answer, you know, not only, yes, I see flowers or flower buds, but give us an idea of how many you're seeing, you're welcome to do that, but you don't have to. So if this feels too overwhelming, don't worry about it. If you're really interested in it, maybe you do this for a few weeks and you're like, yeah, I'm ready to start and try to do the intensity questions. We also have an observer certification course online that walks through, has a whole module on intensity estimation. So I welcome you to check that out. If you're interested in getting more into this, we have lots of training materials to help you with that. So these ones are the ones that we are focused on here. But as I said, you're welcome to also report on the fruits. Another thing to keep in mind is you should be thinking about each of these questions separately. So don't think that you only answer yes to either flowers or flower buds or open flowers. You should be considering these independently. So you can say yes for both flowers or flower buds and open flowers. And you should. If you're saying yes for open flowers, it means you're seeing any flowers or flower buds on the plant. So this is kind of an overarching phenophase where you should, if you're saying open flowers, always be saying flowers or flower buds as well. And I wanted to mention, we do have one milkweed that's a little special. This one is considered more of a woody plant. And so we actually put it under a different protocol than the rest of the milkweeds, which are considered more of forbs or non-woody plants. So you'll see the phenophase questions are slightly different for this one. It'll have young leaves instead of initial growth because it really doesn't die back to the ground. It'll lose leaves sometimes, but it won't actually die back where the stems disappear as well. So you don't have to answer all of these questions. We're really interested in the young leaves and the leaves for that one. So that's what to focus on for that species. Okay, and then as far as monarchs, you'll see the data sheet is quite long. There are lots of questions on here, but again, we're only interested in a subset of these. We're really interested in these 4 phenophases. We're interested in whether you see adults, these are the butterflies, whether you're seeing mating, egg laying, or caterpillars. And again, we have definitions to tell you exactly what we're looking for these. And especially of interest is for the caterpillars, we give you a description of what those caterpillars look like. So if you forget, oh, what was that difference between the monarch and the queen caterpillars, you can always reference the definition. And these will be in the app as well. There's a little eye symbol right next to the question where you can tap that and get this definition right there. And if you want to enter the abundance or intensity for the monarchs, it's simply telling us how many of the either the butterflies or the caterpillars you see when you do your observations. And I just included a couple pictures here in case you haven't seen mating, what that might look like, as well as egg laying, where the female's putting her abdomen here on the underside of the milkweed leaf, which is usually where they lay the eggs. And then one other consideration for when you're doing your observations of the monarchs, we are interested in which milkweed your monarchs are interacting with. And so if you do see something like egg laying or caterpillars, or even, if you're recording these other things, the feeding, you can also put in the comments for your observation which of your plants you see that. So you can also, if we encourage you to just observe one milkweed, you can do more than one if you like. So if you were observing two, if you say, I saw caterpillars, but it was on milkweed 1 only, that'll really help us kind of tie those observations together of the monarchs and your milkweed, because your 2 milkweed plants might have different phenology. Or if you see caterpillars, but it's on a milkweed you're not even observing, then we want to know that too, because we won't then associate your data with the milkweed that you're tracking in Nature's Notebook. So feel free to put anything you like here. If you say what it was happening and then on the milkweed nickname at least, or the species that you're tracking, that's really helpful for us. Okay, so let's go through and kind of walk through what it might be like to fill out the data sheet. So this example here, an Arizona milkweed. And so what we would be looking at here again are the leaf questions and the flower questions. And so we can see on this plant, you can see that there are definitely leaves here. There are some younger leaves, but I would not call this initial growth because it's not new growth that's happening after a period of dormancy or drought. If this was a plant that, it was really dormant for a couple months and then there was brand new growth that was coming out and the leaves were small like this, then I would answer yes for initial growth. But for this one here, I would just call these leaves. And then you can see here, there are flower buds here, but they're not open yet and showing the reproductive parts. So the way that I would fill out this data sheet is I would say no for initial growth. I would say yes for leaves. I would say yes for flowers or flower buds. And then I would say no for open flowers for that week. And again, those no records are so important for this study and for knowing what's not happening yet on your plant and with monarchs. So make sure that you fill those in. As for monarchs, move this over here. In this photo here that we're looking at, I don't see any monarch activity. So what I would circle is all no's for those 4 phenophases of interest. On the app, we do have an option to circle all no. And so you can just tap that if you don't see the monarch. And that will just fill in all of these as no for your site on that day. All right, so I have a poll that I'm going to launch and it has a whole bunch of questions on it to correspond to the data sheet questions. So I'm hoping this will work smoothly. Let's see. Okay, so take a look at this photograph and based on what you see, I'm going to launch the poll and you'll see there are 8 questions on this because we do have, a few questions for the milkweed and a few questions for the monarch. So take a couple minutes and go through. I welcome you to use that question mark if you're not sure. Don't feel like you're forced to answer. You always have the question mark as your option. So go ahead and go through the questions. And then we will look at them at the end. And I did include with the questions, it's not the full phenophase definition because it would fit in the question, but I put the key parts that I think are most useful for answering the question. So this is the same kind of information that you'll have in the app when you fill out the data sheet. And this is a pine needle milkweed, so it does have that kind of special first question, the young leaves instead of the initial growth. I'll give it just a little more time. I know there are a lot of questions on there. And you'll find as you do this weekly, you'll get quicker at it. You know, you'll start to know, oh, I see flowers again this week. And so, you know, it'll be a little more time at first as you learn how to interpret the different questions, and then it will take less time as you go. It looks like about half of people are done, so I'll give it a couple more minutes. You'll also, when you're visiting your plant, be looking around just in the vicinity of your plant if you see any adult monarchs flying around as well. So it's hard to represent that in a picture, but you would be looking to see if there's any activity right near your plant too. All right, looks like we're almost there. Let's just give it a couple more seconds in case anyone else wants to report. I'm not sure how the results are going to look with this many questions. It's an experiment. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results and let's take a look. Okay, so the first question is, do you see young leaves? And this tells you a leaf is considered young once its entire length has emerged, but before the leaf has reached full size or turned the darker green color or tougher texture of mature leaves. So this one we had, most people said no, a couple of people said yes, and there were a couple question marks. This is tricky. I feel like this question is easier if you're there in person and you can kind of interact with the plant and touch it and feel if the leaves feel different. I would say maybe these little guys might be young leaves, although you know, they look a little bit lighter, but they're also, they might be tougher if you touch them if you were in person. So I would probably for this picture put a question mark myself because I'm just not sure. You know, there could be some in here, but I just don't know. But any of those responses are okay. So this one's a little bit trickier. As for leaves, this is much more straightforward and everyone got it right. Yes, there are definitely leaves on this plant. Do you see flowers or flower buds? Also another one that's more straightforward. And yes, everyone got it right. There are definitely flowers or flower buds on this plant. So this is a good one because even though all these flowers are open, we're still considering them flowers or flower buds. That's any sort of flowers at all that you see on the plant. And then open flowers, where you can see the reproductive parts. Everyone got that one as well. There are definitely lots of open flowers on this plant. As for monarchs, we had some no's and some question marks, which is good. There could be a monarch somewhere on this plant. We just can't see it in the photo, but we definitely can't see it here. Do you see mating? No, we're not sure. Do you see egg laying? No, we're not sure. And then do you see caterpillars? Yes. And one person said not sure, which is great. If you're not sure, you know, this is kind of hard to see. We can't really see if there's those 3 sets or the 2 sets. If you've seen a lot of monarch caterpillars, you can probably spot this right away. So you might be more familiar, but definitely fine to say the question mark until you know for sure. So great. All right, let me go to the next one. I have a couple more of these for us to go through together. So, all right, so how about this guy? I'm gonna launch another one. So this one, because this is a brush or desert milkweed, this one has initial growth instead of the young leaves phenophase, but all the other questions are the same as the last poll. All right, we've got a couple of responses coming in. I'll give it a little longer for more people to report. We've got about half so far, so I'll give it just a little longer. Okay, I'll share the results. So for this one, this is another one where it's really hard to see whether there's initial growth. We would have to also have kind of seen this plant for a couple weeks, I think, to know if there was initial growth happening. You might be able to see it if you had visited the plant the first time and saw some really tiny leaves. But I think it's one of those phenophases that if you're observing weekly, you can see a difference from last week to this week where there weren't any leaves last week and all of a sudden maybe it started raining. There are some new leaves on the plant. So that one is tricky. I would probably say a question mark because I'm just not sure on this one. For leaves, that's another one for this plant especially. It doesn't always have leaves on it. You know, it has these green stems. I don't know if I can see any leaves on here. Maybe they're behind this. Yeah, I feel like that's another one where I don't really see any. There might be some eagle-eyed people here who spotted a couple, but I think it's really hard to see them. So I probably would do a question mark for that. Flowers or flower buds? Everyone said yes, great. Open flowers. This one that we did have one person say no. So these, I would say that these are open flowers. You can, especially if you're there in person, you can see the difference between this flower here and this bud here. This one is definitely open and showing the reproductive part. So that would be considered an open flower. As for monarchs, we don't see any adults here. We don't see mating. We don't see egg laying. And this is a little bit of a tricky one. So from what we learned about how to tell apart the monarch and the queen caterpillars, remember that the monarch caterpillars only have 2 sets of these little thingies that stick out here. The queens have 3. And so this is actually a queen caterpillar. So it's a little bit of a trick question. But again, you can always read that definition where it says older caterpillars have 2 pairs of black tentacles. So remember that 2 rule. So this one has 3. So you would not consider that to be a monarch caterpillar. So if you figure it out later and maybe you say, oh no, I need to go back and change my data, you can always do that. You can do it in the app. There's a review screen where you can actually go back to your previous observation and just change it and then resave. And on the website, you can edit your observations as well. All right. And got another one here. Let's maybe do, I have 2 more, but let's do one. And then we will make sure we have time for questions. So last one here. How about this guy? All right, give it a little bit longer. Looks like people are getting the hang of it now. The questions are getting completed a little faster. So once you kind of read through them all, you have a sense of what we're asking. So much easier as you get the hang of it. All right, I'm gonna end it and let's see. So do we see initial growth? Yeah, again, this is maybe an unsure or no. Looks like these are more mature leaves. Do we see leaves? Yes. Do we see flowers or flower buds? Yes. Do we see open flowers? Yes. Do we see adults? And yes, this is a monarch. And so, yeah, a couple of the things that Kim pointed out earlier, those kind of dark lines on this part of the butterfly, less of an overall kind of like burned or dark orange look. It has this lighter color here. So you will, as you get to know monarchs versus queens, it'll be easier to tell them apart. Do we see mating? No. Egg laying? No. And caterpillars? No. Nice job, everybody. Thank you for playing along with this. And I did have this one we're not going to go through, but this is a queen. And I don't know if we saw a picture yet of this side of the queen, but it looks quite a bit different from monarchs from this angle. I think they look a little bit more similar from the underside. Okay, so there are many training resources available to help you. I mentioned we have an observer certification course. This is optional, but if you feel like you want to really get into how to use Nature's Notebook and take advantage of all of our training resources, we have multiple modules that go through anything from the basics of just how to set up your site and add plants and edit data, all the way up to those tips on estimating intensity. And then we also, as Natalie mentioned as well, have these great phenophase photo guides. I think we have them for all but one species. We're still working on the last one, I think Antelope horns milkweed. So we'll get that done. And we are, as you can see, still looking for some photos. So if you're observing some of these species and you have some nice photos, feel free to send them to us and we can update the guides. But these are just a nice thing to print out and take with you. It has a photo of what you're looking for and those phenophase definitions printed out. And they also have some tips on how to tell apart the species as well. And all of those are available on the website, which we will put a link to. So just to summarize, when you're getting started, you'll want to set up a Nature's Notebook account, register a site, can be your backyard or another location, add your milkweed and monarchs as a species, and then make your weekly observations. We also encourage you to sign up. We have an email list where we'll be using to send out opportunities, updates, results, and things. And you can sign up on the landing page here on the right-hand side. All right.
So I'll pick back up. Thanks, Erin. So if you're looking for milkweed plants, you know, if you're like, oh yes, I really want to do this, but I don't have a milkweed in my yard, or otherwise, definitely will encourage you if you're in the Phoenix area. Desert Botanical Gardens plant sale definitely benefits, you know, our monarch conservation work. So, and a lot of the plants were grown, a lot of the milkweeds that are available were grown on site, and there'll be some other cool nectar plants and stuff as well that you can add to your butterfly habitat. In Tucson, some great like smaller nurseries to check out, Spadefoot Nursery and Desert Survivors, both kind of provide a lot of like support for the community, and also like here plants as wildlife habitat, which is really cool. You know, beyond that, we know that there's lots of different people on the call from different locations, which is really cool. Monarch Joint Venture has a milkweed and wildflower vendor map that you can check out. And yes, thanks to pointing out the Tohono Chul plant sale. I hope you have, we'll have milkweed there. That's great. Yes, checking out these kind of nonprofit sales, smaller nurseries, things like that is are really better to support, really. So yes, check out the Monarch Joint Venture. And if Tohono Chul is, I don't know if you're from there, sorry, but they if you're not on this map, you can always contact Monarch Joint Venture and they would be more than happy to add you. They're a great source of monarch information and partners, and definitely reach out to them. Cool. So if you want to flip, Erin. Okay, so we've given you kind of the minimum of what you can do, you know, or, you know, what we're asking of you, you know, one milkweed once a week, that, you know, for a, you know, the short period of time. But if you want to do more, there's always more that you can, you know, we've offered several options throughout this training, that you can track more than one milkweed in your yard, you can track more than one species. We saw that in the pilot. We had 9 different species that were being tracked, some people tracking multiples in their yards. So you can always do more than that. You can track it more than once a week. All of that is options that are available to you. There is one more option that is a little more in depth, I guess, is this Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. This is a project, another community science project that was started by Monarch joint venture. And they have, you know, similar to this training, but they're going to have a required training that I think occurs over 2 Zoom sessions, and it's also recorded. And I'm sorry. And we've got, and they track things a little more carefully, like with the instars, the caterpillars, you know, they track the different stages. So that's a little more intense option, but it's also, it provides more data and it's all really useful. So if you're looking for more, definitely reach out for this Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And if you want to reach out to me, I would put you in touch with the trainers for Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. We have some local trainers, and it would all be virtual too. So yes, very similar study goals. We are working in concert. We're working jointly with Monarch Joint Venture and Monarch Larva Monitoring Project we're kind of providing the abbreviated version. For Arizona, at least for right now. So definitely, sorry, the dangers of, you know, still working remotely, my dog's back here, but so thank you all for participating or being, you know, coming here to learn more about participating. Really appreciate it.
And I did put the contact information here, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions, especially MLMP for that. Reach out to Kim. If you have like Nature's Notebook specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm just looking in the chat to see if we have questions. There was a question about monarchs versus viceroys. Do we have those anywhere in the state?
We do. Viceroys, I've seen them in, but more in like riparian areas in the desert. I've never seen them in like in an urban area. So, but there are definitely guides online to see the difference between the two. And viceroys are not related to queens and monarchs. They're just a mimic. So their host plant is actually willows, which is again where we're mostly gonna find them in riparian areas.
Great. And then someone asked about Milkweed Vine. And it looks like Natalie answered that she's seen queen caterpillars feeding on it, but they don't have data on whether monarchs are using it. I don't think that we have that in Nature's Notebook, but if there's a big interest, we could always add it, you know, if it's something that we want to look at to see if monarchs are using it. But I don't think we have it at this time. But if you did see a monarch while you're doing your observations, you can always put in the comments, I saw it interacting with the milkweed vine, if you want to record that as well. And a question about the fruits. Yeah, so it's a capsule that when it's ripe, it opens. It has a bunch of big fluffy seeds, so it's very obvious when you see that. And I think we do have for the phenophase photo guides, photos of what those look like for each of the species. And then, oh yeah, we have Tohono Chul has a plant sale, and then there is also Tucson Botanical Gardens is having a Dia de los Muertes festival on the 30th of October, and they're doing seed ball making with milkweed seeds from Borderlands Restoration Network. So another great opportunity there. And we can definitely, you know, when we send out email updates, we can include those events too, to make sure people know about them. And then there was a question about I think specifically to Tohono Chul. So yeah, if you're part of a local phenology program where it is actually a group of people that are observing together, get in touch with me, because usually if you're an observer as part of those programs, you don't have the privilege to edit them and add species. But if you don't have contact through the administrator, I can get you in touch with them, and we can figure out a way for you to track monarchs and milkweeds at those sites as well. Yeah, so you don't need to join any groups. The way that we'll find your data is we'll look at all the data that are reported on any milkweeds and then monarchs in Arizona. So no worries there. We'll definitely have access to your data. If there aren't any other questions, I don't think I've missed any, but, oh, there's one more. Is it true that milkweed milk is toxic? I think it is. I mean, if like a pet or a person ingested it, I think, but I don't know. I mean, maybe there might be a little skin sensitivity, but I don't think you have to worry too much about it. I try to keep my milkweed plants away from my desert tortoise, but I think she kind of knows what she's doing, and I think most pets probably would too. I don't know that you can propagate it though. Do you guys know? You can take a cutting or only from seed.
You can do stem cuttings for some milkweeds. The desert milkweed, the cellulata, I think is probably your best bet for that one. Might depend on what species you're looking at.
Yeah, so give it a try. All right, well, thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate your interest and really excited to have you on board. Oh, I did not put the link, but I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with the recording, and I'll also include a link to the mailing list in case you want to get emails from us with updates. And then we'll send you the landing page as well with all of those phenophase photo guides and make sure that you have everything you need. But feel free to reach out with any other questions. And again, just thank you so much for being here.